The number of features available inside of Terra Dotta software can be somewhat daunting at first, and this is why the company suggests that you implement it in phases. However, what should you focus on first? In this final part of our 4-part video series on the software, Jack Hobson lays out his 10-unit scale for implementation.
So if you think you want to do 10 things, definitely take 3 of them and put them on the back burner. Talk about the middle 3 or 4 in the near future and really only do 3. But you start talking about the middle ones like someday, maybe wouldn't that be cool? That'd be great, yeah. And you kind of normalize the idea of it. But if you try to unpack and do everything simultaneously, particularly if you're new to an organization or an office and you want to implement this as your new thing, institutions of higher education change slowly, both in the macro and the micro. Particularly because much of the conversations that need to happen involve changing the way in which an office functions, both internally and the way in which they function externally. I think one great piece of advice that I can give to any institution or organization that wishes to implement Studio Abroad is, or a Terra Dotta product, or any kind of new software, in fairness, broadly speaking, is you cannot implement a new package like this and expect the way in which you function to remain the same. The purpose of implementing this is to change the way you function. And it will drive that change whether you want it or not.
So with that in mind, I asked Jack whether or not there's a mandatory timeline or if there were options, and how all of this fits into his scale of 10.
If you are going to unpack a Terra Dotta product and you're going to implement it, there are going to be some that you have no choice but to immediately tackle. The IT pieces and getting integrated with your software, your website, your login, that's a biggie. And that may be 3 of the 10 immediately. And obviously you're going to use this for application purposes. So coming up with some kind of pre-advising, advising, post-acceptance stuff is going to be part of that. Now what you may decide though are things like, so there's a blogging component, there's an assessments component, all of that gets pushed back. Because maybe, for example, someone really feels the value that we have to do all of these orientations now still all in person. We have to do that way. And until you move them psychologically away from that, because students have changed the way in which they learn, you leave that piece alone. And so maybe you don't implement that in the assessments piece. Maybe the political climate is not ripe for the risk management stuff. You push that, you push that. Maybe the political climate is not right for other study abroad programs that happen on campus to even run through your system. So you only focus on what you're doing. You push that. Maybe you are involved in reciprocal exchange, and maybe you only decide to run your outgoing through the system and not your incoming. You can push that. So that harkens back to that flower metaphor of controlling how much the bloom opens up. As the director or project manager, you have the control of that. And so, yes, there are going to be some parts of that 10, maybe 5, that you have no choice but to handle. But there's some other pieces that you could really, really push back for later.
The final thing that Jack wanted to point out was that administrators should not forget that even though we're talking about a piece of software here, the person-to-person interactions that go on between departments on your campus will always be present.
Understanding the human side of software implementation is critically important, and that there are going to be pieces that you may not be able to implement because of human dynamics at an institution. So for example, we still have one paper piece left for our non-LMU programs, and that's our credit agreement form, the transfer credit agreement form. And I floated it a couple of times on ways in which maybe we could try to get it done, and it's something we have yet to unknot. So we've left it alone. So if you are an LMU student going on a non-LMU program and you are pre-articulating credits, that's still a piece of paper that gets shepherded around, for now. So you leave that piece alone. Everything else is all online.